Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. I'm Lisa Friend, and I'm delighted to be your moderator this evening. As you may know, Rick is in Europe right now, but he has left the show, Monday Night Travel, in what he believes are capable hands. I hope to prove him, along with my friend Cameron Hewitt, that he has done the right thing by us this evening. I'm really excited about the shows that we're having this week and the next few weeks, so I want to take a peek at them with you. So let's try this. I've never done this before. Should be pretty exciting. Okay, there's Rick on Mont Blanc in France. So that is going very well. Scroll down here to Monday Night Travel. Click on that. And then you'll see tonight we have Iceland Favorites with Cameron Hewitt, my friend and fellow tour guide. And then next week on October 25th, we have Stefan from Bulgaria, and he is going to tell us all about his homeland and how to pronounce his last name. I'm looking forward to that. And then on November 1st, we have an unusual show. We're having a roundtable with the moderators. So myself, Gabe Gunnick, Julianne Worden, Cameron Hewitt will be acting as our moderator, and we will have the OG moderator, Ben Green, calling in from his studies in Russia. So that should be, I think, a really good time. 2 weeks after that, we have pandemic travel with Cameron again and Rick. They've both traveled in Europe extensively after COVID, so to speak, and they're going to be sharing all of the things that you need to know about getting back to Europe as soon as you can. So please put your travel dreams in the upright and locked position as I have the pleasure to introduce our tour guide for the evening, Cameron Hewitt.
Hey, Lisa, thank you so much. Hey, thanks so much. Great to be here.
So I'm so excited that you're here. I've known you for a long time. We're not going to talk about how many years, but I'm excited to introduce you to our Monday Night Travel family this evening. But could you tell us a little bit about yourself so they get to know you as well as I do?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been working with Rick for 20 years. I think you started a year or two before me, Lisa, if I'm not mistaken. So we've known each other for a very long time. Yeah, so I've been working with Rick for a long time. I started out at the travel center, but I worked my way through the guidebook area. And these days I kind of handle all sorts of things dealing with content. So a lot of that has to do with our guidebooks. I do a lot of the research, updating of our guidebooks and writing new guidebooks. I also help out with the TV show sometimes. You know, I've done some tour guiding as well. Just sort of whatever it takes. As you know, a lot of us here at Rick Steves wear a lot of different hats.
Would you like to take us to Iceland this evening?
I would love to take you to Iceland. And you're probably wondering, who is this guy and why is Rick not here? So I can answer that in two parts. The reason why Rick is not here, as Lisa mentioned, is he's actually traveling in Europe. He's back in Europe already. He's actually training some new tour guides on a tour through Italy, getting ready for next year. We're very hopeful for a big return to travel in 2022. So he asked me to fill in, and the reason he asked me to fill in is a couple years ago, I went and worked on our Iceland guidebook. So a lot of the stuff I'll be talking about tonight is in our Iceland guidebook, and I've spent several weeks traveling there for work and also been back several times for fun. So I'm really excited to take you to Iceland. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started with the slides. Okay, everyone should see an iceberg on a beach right there. Is that right? Cool. Great, let's go to Iceland. I'm really excited to share this place with you. It's just a beautiful, interesting, just a gorgeous place and a really interesting place. So I hope you'll enjoy taking a little virtual armchair tour of Iceland with me. You know, when we think of Iceland, we think of the capital city, Reykjavík, and it really is a beautiful city, a small city, but very pleasant, easy to get around. But I would say the main reason people like to go to Iceland is for the incredible countryside. I mean, this is just one of the most spectacular places you're going to find anywhere on Earth. The variety of incredible landscapes, it just kind of blows your mind. The word that I always think of to describe Iceland is cinematic. It just looks like every science fiction epic you ever saw should have been filmed in Iceland. And actually a lot of them were. Very often I'm watching a Star Wars movie or another sci-fi movie and I say, I think that's Iceland. In fact, Rick and I were hoping to film 2 new TV shows on Iceland in 2022. By the beginning of that year, we'd already written a couple of scripts for 2 new episodes. We were starting to actually schedule hotels and tour guides and get permissions, but we all know what happened in early 2020. So those plans got scrapped temporarily, but Rick and I are excited to go back soon and finally do those 2 Iceland episodes sometime in the next couple of years, we hope. I want to give you a quick taste of what we're going to see on our tour of Iceland tonight, just to give you a little sampling of the scenery that you'll see around Iceland. You have lots of course, in Iceland, lots of beautiful fjordside towns and villages. You have beautiful gurgling waterfalls. You have fields of purple flowers. You have big churning epic waterfalls. You have adorable horses, curious little horses that come up to your car when you pull off on the side of the road. You have amazing bridal veil waterfalls. You have bird cliffs where you have seabirds like puffins who are nesting and roosting, and you can kind of sit up there and watch the puffins come in and get up close to them. You have epic waterfalls, of course. You have expansive black sand beaches. Did I mention there's waterfalls in Iceland?
Cameron, did you take these pictures?
Yeah, I did. I took almost all of the pictures in this slideshow. Yeah, I've been very lucky to be able to be all over Iceland for work, and I always take my camera with me.
They're stunning.
Thanks. Well, thank you. Well, Iceland is stunning. It's not hard to take great pictures in Iceland, but it's a place where I'm really glad that it's worth it to carry the big weight of my big camera to be able to take some of these pictures. It's a really inspiring landscape. So part of the reason Iceland is so spectacular is because of the volcanic and geothermal landscapes that you'll find there. So all over Iceland, you're going to find places like this where you can literally see steam rising out of the ground. Some of these landscapes are active, and some of the landscapes were volcanic years ago or centuries ago. And so everywhere you go, you see signs, different types of lava rock, different types of steam venting from the ground and that sort of thing. It's a very geothermically active landscape. But of course, Iceland is the land of fire and ice. So this is also a place where you can see glaciers and really get the sense that you're really up close to the Arctic Circle. It's amazing to go from a steaming, bubbling geothermal field, and then a few hours down the road, you're looking at icebergs. It's just an amazing place. As I mentioned, I got to know Iceland a few years ago when I went to work on our Iceland guidebook, the first edition of that book. That book was co-authored by Ian Watson, who's a good friend of ours, who's worked with us on many guidebooks over the years. And he's an American, but he actually lived in Iceland for quite some time. He speaks Icelandic, he has Icelandic citizenship. His kids were born in Iceland. And so he kind of wrote the first pass of the book and gave it a lot of insider Icelandic wisdom. And then I had the really joyful experience of traveling on top of Ian's work and kind of Rick Stevesifying it and kind of making it fit our style. And it was a great collaboration. So like I said, a lot of the ideas that are going to come out tonight are from Ian, and they're all from this book as well. So if you're curious to learn more. Like I said, I've been to Iceland for work, and now I've been, Lisa, you can probably relate to this. You go someplace for work, you really love a place when you go back on your own dime, right? Where you say, I'm going to actually spend money to come back here when I don't have to, And Iceland is one of those places. And
you pay for your husband or your wife to come
exactly.
too because you love it so much you want to share it with them. Yes.
Exactly. So for me, Iceland is one of those places that is really worth paying for. I've been back both for work and for fun, and I just love it. I'm going to do the way that I've structured this talk tonight. I'm going to first kind of give an introduction to Iceland and talk a little bit about what Iceland is, who the Icelanders are, and so forth. And then from there, we're going to have a few Q&A breaks, as Lisa said. Later, I'm going to talk about Reykjavík and some of the day trips from Reykjavík. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about the Ring Road, which is if you want to drive all the way around the perimeter of Iceland and see some even farther afield sites. I did want to mention, I always feel kind of self-conscious because I do a longer version of this talk that's a full hour and a half that's just hard-hitting skills, travel tips for people who are definitely going to Iceland. For tonight's talk, I decided to take out some of the heavy-hitting travel skills and just make it relaxed and fun, kind of a virtual armchair tour of Iceland. But if you want all of those hard-hitting travel skills, I did record a version of that slideshow a couple years ago, and that's available on ricksteves.com. And I think it's in the list of links that Lisa put in the chat, and also it'll be in the email that you're sent tomorrow. So if you want all the details about Iceland, that'll be the place to do it. But for now, let's just do kind of a once over lightly and just get oriented to what this place is. As you probably know, Iceland is an island nation. It's a pretty small island. It's about the size of the state of Maine. The population is about 360,000 people. So in the entire country of Iceland, it's about as many people as Honolulu, or like Corpus Christi, Texas, just to give you a sense of how small this country is. You can see the dotted line at the top of this picture. That's the Arctic Circle. So actually most of Iceland isn't quite Arctic, but it's pretty darn close. And there's a couple of little islands off the north coast of Iceland that are actually over the Arctic Circle. Iceland is located in the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, between the British Isles and Scandinavia on one side and Greenland on the other side. And that makes it perfectly located for a layover for people flying between North America and Europe. And I'm guessing if you've been to Iceland, or if you're thinking about going to Iceland and watching this show, it's because you're intrigued about this possibility. As you might know, Iceland Air offers the ability to take a layover of, I think it's 2 or 3 days without being charged extra to hang around in Iceland on your way over to Europe, on your way home from Europe. And this was a really clever marketing strategy to get more people to actually stop and check out Iceland. And it's been a great chance for a lot of folks going to Europe to at least get a little taste of Iceland on their way over. I was one of those people myself just a few weeks ago. I was in Europe in September, as Lisa mentioned. And on my way home from Berlin, I made one mistake, which is it was hot and balmy in Berlin. So I wore shorts and a short sleeve shirt. And then I had about an hour and a half layover in Iceland. And it was a little bit of a shock to the system to step out onto the tarmac in the howling subarctic winds and walk into the terminal. But I got to say, even in just that really short layover, I just was aching to get back and settle in and enjoy Iceland. Please excuse this picture. This was taken on my cell phone out of a grimy airplane window, but this is what I saw on my way into the Iceland airport to change planes. In the foreground, you see the steam of the Blue Lagoon lava rock spa, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And in the background up above there, you can see the steam from Iceland's newest volcano. If you've been following the news, you know that in this year in March, the newest Icelandic volcano suddenly appeared. I'm pretty good at Icelandic words, but this is a new word because it's a new volcano. So I think I'm not as good at this one. I think it's Fagradalsfjall, I think is the name of this Icelandic volcano. And this is just a reminder that Iceland has this ever-changing landscape. There's always something to see or do. I will say, this is, Lisa, you asked about my pictures. This is the one picture I did not take because I haven't been there yet. But if there's any number of reasons to go to Iceland, including the possibility of seeing a live volcano. And like I said, I just had an hour and a half in the airport, and it just kind of killed me not to be able to follow that sign that says exit to Iceland and go out and see the place. So I hope the next time you're flying through Iceland on the way to Europe, maybe this talk will inspire you to stick around for a couple of days, or who knows, maybe go back for a full week or more and see more of the place. If you do go back to Iceland, one thing that you might find is that when I first went to Iceland, I really didn't understand who the Icelanders were or where they came from. And when you go to Iceland, you realize it's really a Scandinavian culture in a lot of ways. When Rick Steves goes to Iceland with his Norwegian heritage, he finds that he has these distant cousins everywhere that he goes. Iceland was initially settled and populated by people from Scandinavia, basically from today's Norway and Denmark and Sweden. They came over during the Viking Age. Some people say Iceland was settled by Vikings. Stickler would say that's not quite right. Actually, the Vikings didn't settle Iceland, but their cousins did. The cousins who were more interested in settling and creating farms and putting down roots, as opposed to the Vikings, who were a little bit more violent and more interested in pillaging and marauding. So but it was around that same time period. It kind of helps to think around the late 800s and 900s was the first time that people ever set foot on this island for the most part. And even all the way up until the 19th century, Iceland didn't really have towns or cities. It was just a lot of isolated farmsteads. People would put a farm on this fjord and then a farm 3 fjords over. So it was a very kind of remote, isolated country. And I think that really shaped the character of the Icelandic people. I love traveling in Iceland just for the sake of getting to meet the people. I find Icelandic people just a delight to get to know. One thing is I really like Scandinavian people. When I go to Scandinavia, I'm part Norwegian myself, and I really feel at home there. I find people are not going to bowl you over with being super outgoing, but they're very kind and they're very warm and open and thoughtful, a little bit reserved. Icelanders are quite similar. But I would say something that I really like about Icelanders is they have this pioneer spirit. There's this kind of sense, as you can imagine from this history. They'll just kind of take any situation and make the most of it. They're very smart and pragmatic about dealing with things that come up. And as I travel around Iceland, I just love getting to know the people. As with when you travel anywhere, but I think in Iceland in particular, I've had some great experiences. And actually, one of those is the story behind my Icelandic sweater. You can see I'm wearing my traditional Icelandic sweater. You can tell I'm wearing my Icelandic sweater because of the sweat pouring down my neck. I'm going to take it off in a second because it's you don't want to wear an Icelandic sweater unless you're ready to wear an Icelandic sweater. But the way I came by this was just a classic experience, the kind of thing that happens all the time in Iceland. I was traveling in the West Fjords, which is way up in the northwest part of Iceland. You feel very far from civilization. I was driving on unpaved roads, and I came to this little farmstead. I was working on a chapter for our guidebook, and I was looking at countryside B&B. So I stopped off at this country inn and I knocked on the door, and this guy kind of was surprised to see me. It was the very end of the season. It was about the first week of September. And in Iceland, the summer season is very short, from basically July to August. So he was already kind of shutting things down for the winter. But I explained, hey, yeah, I just wanted to learn more about your B&B. And so he showed me around, and he just seemed like such a nice person, kind of almost suspiciously nice and chatty. I actually wondered, is he just sort of a chatty small town type, or is there maybe some sort of serial killer vibe going on? But the more I talked to him, the more I realized, no, he's just a really nice guy, and he lives out at the end of the world. And he's just thrilled to have someone stop in today when he thought it was going to be quiet all day and chat. So he showed me around the place, and I could tell he was just really enjoying the company and flattered that I would be there. And on my way out the door, I noticed he had a rack of Icelandic sweaters. Now, I'd been to Iceland already a few times. This is kind of the ultimate Icelandic souvenir, but they're very expensive. They're like $300. It can be up to $300. And so I've never been willing to splurge on one, but I was sort of admiring these sweaters. He says, why don't you take one of those sweaters? And I said, oh, that's okay. I'm not really in the market for something that expensive. He said, you know what? I really enjoyed having the company today. Why don't you just take it? So he took the sweater off the rack, and he took off the $250 price tag, and he handed me the sweater. He said, I'm just really flattered that you're interested in my place and in my part of the world. And then he said on the way out the door, he says, well, don't forget the beanie to go along with it. He gave me the matching beanie. And so, man, I was toasty warm for the rest of the trip. I was telling the story to my wife, and she said, well, that makes it sound like he was like bribing you to get in the guidebook. But honestly, I'm not even sure he realized I was working on a guidebook. It was just a very genuine, a natural thing where it's a guy who lives in the middle of nowhere and just liked having the company for the day. And again, I think Icelanders are really flattered. They get a lot of tourism, but people just kind of stopping in for a day or two who don't take much interest. And when someone actually slows down and asks them some questions and tries to get to know who they are and their lifestyle, they just really appreciate it. So yeah, it was a touching moment, and I came away from it with a great sweater. I'm going to take the sweater off because I don't think I can make it through this talk wearing this sweater the entire time.
Cameron, while you're disrobing, you didn't have any problems speaking English or Icelandic with him? What's the language barrier situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Everybody in Iceland speaks English. I don't think I've ever met someone in Iceland who doesn't speak English. And that's part of this sort of the practical aspect of when you're living in this isolated community at the edge of the world. You have to be able to get along and make a go of things. And so, yeah, English is never a problem there. I do, obviously, like anywhere, I try to learn the words for hello and thank you, and the polite words, and I use them. And that's another sign, I think, just when you say hello to them in Icelandic, they know right away, oh, this is someone who's actually interested in getting to know Iceland, and ingratiates them to you right away. So anyway, moving on. So I talked a little bit about kind of the hardship of settling this uninhabited island that's close to the Arctic Circle. And now part of that has to do with the volcanic landscapes that I was talking about. If you look at a tectonic map of the world, there's a North American tectonic plate and there's a Eurasian tectonic plate, and they're pulling apart along a line that you can see here that runs right through the middle of Iceland. And that's why Iceland has all these volcanoes. It's why they have all these geothermal fields. And something that really impresses me about Icelanders is they've done an incredible job of harnessing the natural power that is underneath the ground because of their location. As you're driving around Iceland, you'll come across a valley, and there'll just be these huge geothermal plants just simmering in the middle of a field, turning hot water into electricity. They do a great job of harnessing that power. Even just in little towns, I stopped off at the side of a lake, and I was walking on this boardwalk, and I noticed the sand on this beach was literally steaming. And then right next to it, you could see somebody had kind of hatched together this kind of makeshift, I don't even know what they were doing here. They were somehow harnessing the power of this steam. Driving around Iceland, this was maybe 20 or 30 miles outside of Reykjavík. I found that the road that I was driving along was following a giant pipeline. Now, this is not a pipeline for oil, it's a pipeline for hot water. What they do to provide hot water for Reykjavík, way out in the countryside where there's a hot spot, they dig these huge boreholes deep into the Earth's crust. They pump out superheated water, and they actually pipe it all the way into the city. So if you've been to Iceland, you'll be able to relate to this experience. If you turn on the hot water tap in your bathroom, there's two things that happen. It's, first of all, scalding hot. And second of all, there's this kind of faint sulfur smell that comes out. I always think after I've taken a shower in Iceland and I come back in the bathroom, I think, man, who farted in here? Because it's that kind of lingering sulfur smell that's very distinctive. But no, it's because the water that comes out of your hot water tap literally comes from deep inside the Earth's crust. That's the way that the Icelanders have harnessed the power of their nature. And one time I was walking through Reykjavík, and I saw the streets were all torn up and they were laying pipes underneath. And this is basically the citywide version of radiant floor heating. You can imagine in your bathroom, you might have, heaters under the floor that prevent your feet from getting too cold in the winter. This helps prevent ice from building up on the roads in downtown Reykjavik. They have so much hot water at their disposal that they just are coming up with creative ways all the time to harness it. It's really inspiring. One of my favorite ways that the Icelanders harness their hot water is their thermal bathing culture. Now, I am a thermal bathing nut. One of my favorite countries is Hungary, partly because it has these wonderful spa culture, and Iceland, it might not be the first thing you think of, also has a great hot water culture. Icelanders, people ask me sometimes, man, how do the Icelanders live in this climate that they live in? It's in the wintertime, especially, it's so cold, it gets dark so early, there's barely any daylight. How do they get through the winter? Well, there's a really good answer of how they get through the winter. At the end of the day, when the kids are home from school and mom and dad are home from work, they bring up the family and they take them out to these thermal swimming pools. And you will find these all over Iceland. There's about a dozen of them in Reykjavik alone. And basically, this is where people hang out with each other after work. It looks just like a municipal swimming pool, and it kind of feels that way, except the water is really hot. So the big flat pool that you see there, the water might be 80 degrees, and the other pools, the water's like 100 degrees. It's basically like a gigantic hot tub. So even through the winter, people enjoy simmering in these pools. And then I love driving around the Icelandic countryside because it's not just Reykjavik. Every town, every little village, every municipality, you see this sign everywhere, and it's directing you to a beautiful thermal swimming pool where for $10, you can go at the end of a long day driving and splash around in hot water and look out over a fjord, for example. It's just one of my favorite things about traveling in Iceland is it's a great way to recharge at the end of a long day of driving. Another aspect of the sort of hardship culture, the fact that Iceland is a tough place to live. When you live in a basically almost Arctic island in the middle of nowhere, you have to be able to eat just about anything. And so there's a lot of famous kind of tourist cliche hardship foods in Iceland. This is probably the most famous. It's called harkál, which is usually translated as rotted shark. And so actually it begins as one of the ugliest fish that swim in the seas, and that is the Greenlandic shark. Centuries ago, the Icelanders figured out, well, if you catch this shark, you can't just eat the meat by itself, but you can process it so that you can eat it and get that valuable protein. And the way they process it traditionally is they would literally bury chunks of shark meat underground to let it ferment. And then they'd hang it in rafters of barns like this to air dry. I actually went to a shark production facility in Iceland where I took this picture. This might be the worst smelling place I've ever been in my entire life. And I've actually tasted it. A lot of people go to Iceland, you have a chance to just taste a little bit of it. And man, it tastes just the way you think, but worse. I mean, it just tastes like fish that's gone bad. And then there's just this faintest ammonia aftertaste that lingers on your palate for quite some time. So I'm sure Icelanders at home are pulling their hair out because they're saying, oh, this is a tourist cliche. Yes, we have fermented shark, but most people don't eat this anymore. And that's a very fair point. A lot of these hardship foods are more of an illustration of the history of Iceland, and what people eat today is actually pretty amazing. I think Iceland, for me, is one of my favorite food destinations in Europe, frankly. They've got great food culture there. They've got delicious seafood, as you can imagine. You get great fish pretty much everywhere you go. Lamb is a great Icelandic staple. It tends to be really tender. It's got a really nice flavor. Just fantastic. I love going out to eat in Iceland. I will say Iceland's very expensive, so just be prepared for high price tags for things like food. But here's an example. There's a way to there are budget tips that help you get around this. For instance, a restaurant like this one, if you had this plate of food at dinner time, it might be $50 or $60, which is a very high price tag. If you go to the same place at lunchtime, a lot of Icelandic restaurants have lunch specials for about $30 or even $20, $25. So for about half the price, you can get food just as good at lunchtime. And then maybe at dinner time, you do something a little bit simpler to stretch your budget. But however you do it, I would recommend, don't just, a lot of people go to Iceland and just eat hot dogs because it's the cheapest thing you can eat, or they get pizza. And I understand that impulse because it's very affordable. But Iceland, the food is really good. And when you splurge for a little bit better food in Iceland, you get a much better end result. It's really satisfying. So I was talking to Ian Watson, who was this co-author of our Iceland guidebook, and I said, kind of, what do you think is a good souvenir for people bringing home from Iceland? And he said, well, it's pretty tough because a lot of the souvenirs you see sold in stores, you see a lot of like stuffed puffins, all that stuff is made abroad and it's not really authentically Icelandic. He said, one of my favorite souvenirs is Icelandic candy bars. This is something that actually is made in Iceland. It's affordable, it's portable, and it's really Icelandic. And one thing I love about Icelandic candy bars is they have a distinctive taste because a lot of them combine milk chocolate and licorice, which is kind of a combination that not everybody has had. So I'm going to stop my screen share to tell you that on my way back through the Reykjavík airport on this recent trip, I bought a selection of Icelandic candy bars just to kind of have visual aid for this presentation, which I like to keep in my Icelandair barf bag. And earlier this week, through a complicated series of handoffs at our office, I managed to deliver one of these to Lisa. So Lisa, do you have your Dramur candy bar? Have you ever had chocolate and licorice together?
No.
Okay, do you want to try chocolate and licorice together?
Yes.
First of all, do you like licorice?
Honestly, no, but I've gotten better. Like, like 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have eaten fennel. I never would have had anything but now I like it. So I'm nervous yet excited to try this.
I think we should both give it a try. I will say I think there's two kinds of people in this world. There's people who love licorice and people who hate licorice. I happen to love licorice. So this is a slam dunk for me, but I am curious what you think of it. So we're gonna both at the same time take a bite of our Icelandic chocolate and licorice bars. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think? While you're chewing, I can say, for the folks at home, you can see it's milk chocolate, really nice milk chocolate, and then there's a chunk of licorice that runs as a strip sort of through the middle of the chocolate bar. Man, I think it's fantastic.
I like it.
You like it, right?
I was very, very nervous, I will not lie. But the licorice is a little bit salty, and I like a salt and a sweet together. So I do really like it.
Good. I'm glad you like it. Yeah, I mean, you can see, it's funny because I got home a few weeks ago, and every time I open my cupboard, I see all these candy bars. And it's just all I can do to not gobble them down because I love this stuff. I just got to wait for that talk on October 18th because I want to make sure I've got these for the Iceland talk. So now I'm going to be I'll be gorging on these the rest of the week. Yeah, it's good stuff. So, if you want to bring home a souvenir, a cheap, easy to pack souvenir for people at home from Iceland, if you want to bring some stuff home for the folks in the office, who covered for you while you were away, Icelandic chocolate bars.
That's nice. And do most of them taste somewhat similar to that? Because those are really good.
It's a great question. It's funny. I've tried all different kinds, and they all have different names and labels. You saw that slide. They all taste basically the same. They're all basically milk chocolate and licorice. Some of them have a little more salt licorice, which is a very traditional Scandinavian flavor. I love salt licorice too, but yeah, this is basically this is the Icelandic candy bar taste.
Okay, so that was not the worst thing. I was nervous that I was
good. If you don't want to finish it, you're welcome to stick it in my mailbox. I'll be in the office tomorrow, and I'll grab it when I'm there.
Yeah.
So I have a couple other Icelandic taste treats I wanted to share while we're talking about it. And one of them is something that anyone at home can buy at their own grocery store, and that is skyr. I picked out this one because I love the label. It's Icelandic Provisions Skyr with a Viking boat on it. As you probably know, this is kind of like a yogurt. It kind of tastes a little bit like Greek yogurt. But actually, Icelanders have been eating skyr for like 1,000 years. Literally, archaeologists have found barrels filled with this. Basically, by the way, Icelanders would say technically it's not a yogurt, it's a cheese. Somehow, scientifically, this is not a yogurt, but a cheese. To me, it looks and tastes just like yogurt. But anyway, it's actually an old Icelandic staple, even though we've only been seeing it in our stores for the last few years. And I'm going to give it a little taste while we're here. As you can see, it's kind of like, if you haven't had this before, go pick one up the next time you're at the supermarket. It's kind of like a Greek yogurt. It's got that kind of firmness to it, and it's really good. Yeah, I think people like skewed because it tends to be a little lower fat. I think it's made with skim milk. Yeah, really nice. A taste as pure as Iceland, they say.
What does cloudberry taste like? I noticed it was peach and cloudberry.
I'm mostly getting the peach. I couldn't tell you which part of it is the peach and which is the cloudberry, but it's good.
Cloudberry just sounds lovely.
Yeah, well, there was another one that had lingonberry. I think it just sounds Scandinavian. So the last thing I want to sample before we move on to some questions. So if you haven't put any questions in the chat, now's the time. The other thing I picked up at the airport on my way through is brennivin, which is the Icelandic firewater. This is kind of like akavit, which you might have in Norway or in Scandinavia. And the funny thing is the nickname for Brennivin is Black Death. And that makes it sound really terrible, but actually there's a funny reason for it, which is until not that long ago, Iceland's government was very anti-alcohol. So for example, you could only get 3.2 beer in Iceland, 3.2% beer in Iceland for a long time. And so the government mandated that firewater like this had to have a skull and crossbones on it to warn people how dangerous alcohol was for their health. So they don't have that on the label anymore, but sort of tongue-in-cheek, Icelanders still call it the Black Death. But again, it's basically like akavit. And I wanted to just, I'm not much of a drinker, but I am a sampler. So I'm just gonna take a little taste of this. See how I like it. Sorry, I only had one bottle. I should have sent one of those to you, Lisa.
Yeah,
but I need you
thanks a lot.
for the chat. Whew. Yeah, it's really powerful. It's 37% alcohol. You know, it has a little bit of an anise or licorice aftertaste, and there's also a little bit like of a rye flavor to it. It actually tastes very, very much like Iceland. I mean, it tastes it has those same earthy flavors that they have in Iceland. So
is it a little bit like akavit?
Yes, it's a lot like akavit, yeah, but it has its own special flavor. So I'm gonna hand this off to my wife who's sitting in the other room because I need to stay sharp, but she can finish that off for me. So
Hi, Shauna.
So great. I think this is a good time for some questions, and then I'll get back into talking about some of the destinations in Iceland. Anything come in so far?
Oh my goodness, so many. One is a logistical question. If one did everything that you're talking about in the program this evening, about how long would that take?
At a very fast pace, 2 weeks.
Oh, that's a long.
Yeah, the next chunk I'm going to talk about would be about a week to do all of it, and then the ring road takes about a week.
Okay. Someone had very sharp eyes and wanted to know if you're going to those thermal pools in the winter, do they have to walk outside in the freezing cold to get into the hot water?
Yes, you do. But remember, that's part of the experience. You think about like the Russians and the Finns who go to a sauna and then they run out through the snow and jump into a lake that's frozen. Ian Watson, who's our sort of semi-Icelandic friend, says his favorite time to go to those thermal bathing pools is in the winter. Because you get chilled on your way from the locker room to the bath, but then you're in 100-degree water and you're feeling snowflakes rest on your nose as they fall down, and it's just there's something very intoxicating about being there.
Oh, that sounds delightful.
Yeah, it is.
Another logistical question is if they're doing the ring road, should they go clockwise or counterclockwise, or does it matter?
That's also a good question. I'll be getting to the ring road a little bit later. We've written it up in our guidebook to go clockwise. It also works counterclockwise. There's not necessarily a best way to do it. I've done it clockwise, and Ian, our co-author, felt like having done it both ways in his case, he said, I give a slight edge to clockwise, but if you have a good reason to go the other way, it's just as good.
Okay. And Scott from Chicago wanted to know, what condiments do Icelanders put on their hot dogs?
I know that they do those fried onions, those little fried onions. Of course, this comes from Chicago, which is the American capital of encased meats. I have some good friends. I'm part Chicago. My mom grew up in Chicago, so I get it. No, the little fried onions. I think there's certain kinds of mustards / mayonnaise that they use, and I'm trying to remember. It's not quite like our yellow mustard, but there's a kind of a sweet mustard that they use, but they keep it pretty simple.
Thank you. And Larry asked, and I thought this was a great question, and you're one of the best people in the world to answer it. You talked about the guidebook being sort of Rick Steve-ified. What is the Rick Steve style? How can you define that?
Wow, how much time you've got? I think once you've used the Rick Steves, what they say these days, if you know, right? Like once you've used the Rick Steves guidebook, you know what a Rick Steves guidebook is. It's conversational, it's friendly, it's like having a tour guide in your pocket. That's a tagline, but it's actually the way we approach things. We really try to respect the local perspective. That's why it was important for us to collaborate with somebody who'd lived in Iceland. Ian is an American, but he's as much an Icelander as any Icelander I've met. He really dug deep into the culture. And, for example, Ian knows of the 12 thermal bathing pools in Reykjavík. He knows which ones are best for families and which ones are better for hanging out after work and which ones are in the suburbs and so forth. Ian knows which of the roads close down first when the winter sets in. You know, just having that really local insight, but then translating it to the sensibility of an American who hasn't been there before. We always assume our readers are smart and they know what they're doing, but they're not experts. They need someone to kind of guide them through the stuff, and that's what we try to do.
That was excellent. Why'd you give me any grief on that? You're like, that was perfect. And then you mentioned kids. Which one of the pools was kid-friendly? So Amani wants to know, is Iceland a kid-friendly or a family-friendly destination? And are there any particular activities that you would want to point out for them?
That's a good question. I'm not a dad, but I am an uncle. And I can tell you, we're already talking about taking my nephews to Iceland as soon as we can. I think it would be, they're 2 and 4. I think it'd be a fantastic family destination. When I travel around Iceland, I do observe a lot of families traveling there and having a great time. I mean, as you'll see with some of the pictures, imagine just doing a road trip to all the great national parks in the US. It's just all about the outdoors and sort of the grandeur and the spectacle and volcanoes and steaming, bubbling landscapes and glaciers. I mean, it's just a really easy place for kids to appreciate. So I would say just get out and have some fun. And in Reykjavík, I'm not going to get into all the museums and sites in Reykjavík, but there are, for example, there's a great museum that I enjoy called the Whales of Iceland, where they've actually got life-size models of all the different whales, including gigantic like blue whales that swim around the shores of Iceland. That's a great kind of kid attraction, because kids can literally walk up and touch, you know, a life-size model of a giant whale. It gives them a really good sense of that. So, and Ian Watson, who wrote our book, does have kids, and he raised his kids in Iceland until they moved to Germany a couple of years ago. And he also says it's just a great place for families.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And then my last question before we get back to it is, you mentioned that the Icelandic people are descended from Scandinavian settlers. Is Iceland considered part of Scandinavia?
Yeah, it's, I think they call it part of Nordic Europe. So Scandinavia is technically Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And then if you add sort of the countries in the cultural orbit, you pick up Finland, sometimes the Baltic states, but really Finland and Iceland become the Nordic countries. I would say culturally, it feels as Scandinavian as any place. It's definitely, it's got its own spin on it. It's definitely Icelandic, but it feels more like Scandinavia than anything else.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Shall we carry on?
Yes, please. I need to eat more of my candy bar.
Yeah. Again, if you can't finish it, feel free to stick it in my mailbox. I'll be happy to polish it off after lunch tomorrow. So great. So let's take off and start talking about some of the destinations. And that begins with Reykjavík, which is, it's a world capital, right? This is the capital of Iceland. It is a world capital. It's also a really small town. So Reykjavík's population, it's like 220,000 people. So it's about like Scottsdale, Arizona, or Spokane, Washington. So for, even though it's kind of a world capital, it's a really small place, and it's also just, it's built on a really human scale. It's very easy to navigate. It's very walkable. It's actually feels kind of more like an American city. And what I mean by that is, if we say that this is a Scandinavian culture, and you might go to Iceland thinking it'll be kind of like Norway, where you have beautiful old cobbled towns and half timbered houses and kind of old world charm. But remember, Iceland didn't really have towns or cities until about the 19th century. So most Icelandic population centers are pretty modern, and in that sense, they feel more like American cities, which makes them a lot more user-friendly. So they're easy to drive in, easy to park in. They've got these kind of modern walking plazas as opposed to kind of cutesy cobbled old towns. One thing I like about kind of the small scale of Reykjavík is everything is just sort of modest and in its place. The little building you see there, the 2-story stone building, that's the Icelandic Parliament building. So that's just an example of kind of the humility of Iceland. I just love that. I find that really charming. I mentioned earlier with the thermal swimming pools, you know, Iceland has long, dark, brutal, cold winters. And I think kind of to counteract that, I noticed that Reykjavík in particular is really colorful. They just really paint everything beautiful, bright colors. And specifically, I really like the street art in Reykjavík. One of my favorite activities in Reykjavík is just wandering the back streets and seeing all these beautiful murals. And you see this in other parts of Europe, where civic authorities and homeowners realize that if you just leave a big blank empty wall, somebody's going to come along and tag it with ugly graffiti. But if you hire a talented street artist to paint a mural, the other graffiti taggers will leave it alone because it's already been spoken for. So they actually invite people to come and paint these murals, and a lot of them kind of celebrate Icelandic culture. So I love the street art and just the colorfulness and kind of the funkiness of Reykjavík. Reykjavík's just a really fun place to hang out. You know, Reykjavík is sort of the perfect home base. It's excellent for restaurants. It's got a great food scene, shopping, accommodations, nightlife, bars, cocktail bars, microbreweries. It's a great city for all of that stuff. I will say there's not a lot of sightseeing in Reykjavik proper. There's certainly a few things to see, but if you're going to Iceland for 2 or 3 or 4 days even, I would spend the night in Reykjavik, but I might not devote a day to Reykjavik. Sometimes people say to me, I've got 2 days and I want 1 day in Reykjavik and 1 for day trips. And I say, you know what? Why don't you just spend the night in Reykjavik, enjoy it after hours. You'll see plenty of it early and late, and then use your 2 days for 2 different day trips into nature. And I think that's really good advice for this city. There is one site I think that's really worth seeing while you're in Reykjavik, and it's very easy to see because it's topping a hill in the middle of town. This is the main Lutheran church of Reykjavik. It's called the Hallgrímskirkja, and it's a great example of the distinctive Icelandic national style of architecture from the early 20th century. And I love the way that this architecture kind of evokes the Icelandic countryside. One thing, for example, is if you notice there's those kind of stair-step gables. Later, I'll show you pictures in the countryside of volcanic basalt rock, which looks a lot like this. And you can see where the architect tried to kind of evoke some of the classic kind of volcanic stone of Iceland in the design of the building. Inside, you've got this beautiful austere Lutheran interior. And then you can take an elevator to the top of that tower and you've got beautiful views over all of Reykjavik. And when I see this picture, I think of 3 things that this kind of illustrates about Reykjavik. One is just how small it is. I mean, there's some behind me here, but this is the main part of downtown Reykjavik, not a lot of skyscrapers. It's a small town. The colorfulness of it, if you look down there, look at both the rooftops and the houses, they really mix in a lot of color. And then also just look how close the nature is. I just love, you look off and you see the fjords and you see the mountains and you see glaciers. And that's kind of very true to the Icelandic spirit. They live very close to nature, even in the capital city. You just never feel that far away from the Icelandic nature. Speaking of which, I'm going to take us on a quick tour of the 4 major day trips from Reykjavik. There are some others, but these are kind of the 4 prime ones. As I said, if I were you and you're on a short visit, I'd spend the night in Reykjavik, but use your daytime for doing some of these. And I'm going to first talk about the Blue Lagoon, which is down to the south of the city of Reykjavik, but it's near the international airport. It's just, I think, 15 minutes from the international airport. That's a really easy one. A lot of people like to do that on their way in from the airport or on their way to the airport because it's very convenient. The second one is the Golden Circle, which is a driving loop that goes east inland from Reykjavik. The third one is the South Coast, a couple hours down south of Reykjavik along the coastline. And then the fourth one's a little less known, but I really love it. It's called the Westman Islands, and that's just a series of islands just off the South Coast. So I'm going to run through each of these in turn. And I'm going to start with what is probably, if there was one most famous attraction in all of Iceland, it would have to be the Blue Lagoon. I mean, this is just really well known, and for good reason. It's basically, you can see, we saw those Icelandic swimming pools. This is like that on a mega scale, 100-degree water, naturally kind of murky with all these minerals that come out from the Earth's crust. And it's located in this beautiful lava rock landscape. So it's just a kind of an otherworldly thing, really beautiful. And a fun experience. The thing that people don't realize when they go to the Blue Lagoon is that technically they're swimming in industrial waste, which sounds a lot worse than it actually is, but it also talks to how the Blue Lagoon started. So basically in this lava plain, which is again, like 15 minutes from the international airport, they decided to build a geothermal plant and they pumped up all this hot water from deep below the Earth's crust. When it came out, they realized, well, it's got all these minerals in it and they're not unsafe or anything, but we can't really use it for what we want it to use it for. So what we'll do is we'll use this water to heat other water. We'll send that hot water to where we need it, and then we'll just dump out what's left into the field. It's still hot. We've just extracted some of the heat. Well, a bunch of Icelanders discovered this, and they started bathing in these natural lava rock lagoons that were filled with this hot water that was being dumped out by this factory. And then some entrepreneur very cleverly realized, this could be a great tourist attraction. And so now they've turned it into this sort of posh top-end spa. The water, of course, is perfectly safe. And I say it's industrial waste. They've just pulled some heat out of it. They haven't done anything bad to it. But it's sort of a reality check. I would say the Blue Lagoon is famous. It's not for everybody. There's sort of pros and cons. One thing about the Blue Lagoon is it's $100 basically. It's very expensive per person. All of those Icelandic swimming pools I've been showing you are about $10. And so Icelanders don't go to the Blue Lagoon. They might save up and do it once in their lives. But Icelanders have told me the only local people you will ever meet at the Blue Lagoon are working there. it's just not a place that Icelanders go to hang out. So that's something to keep in mind. On the other hand, it's really cool. There's nothing like this anywhere else in Iceland. The environment is incredible. They've done a nice job of kind of making it kind of upscale and posh. You notice there's that kind of residue on the rocks. That's sort of these natural minerals that kind of wash up and coat everything in this kind of white slimy goop. They have these fun little customs. So like you look across the lagoon and you see there's this pavilion where they're handing out little ladles of this white stuff, this basically mineral deposit. And you see everyone there is kind of smearing it on their faces because supposedly it's a really good exfoliant. You know, I don't know if it works, but when you're in the Blue Lagoon, you gotta give it a try. You know, so the Blue Lagoon, it's a fun experience, but again, it's not for everybody. There's pros and cons. One thing I will warn you about, they do have reservations online, and it books up sometimes, especially when things are during normal times. It can book up even a few weeks ahead. So book ahead if you want to go to the Blue Lagoon and make sure you get in. And Lisa, do I understand that this is the one and only place in Iceland that you've been to?
Yes, it is the one and only place I have been to.
So what did you think? Tell me about it.
I enjoyed it. I had a 6-hour layover in Reykjavík, probably 5 years ago now. And, you know, what are you going to do with 5.5 hours? And they make it really, really easy. I had booked it online. You know, this was 5 or 6 years ago, so I only booked it online a few days ahead, but I did book it online. It was easy to get a bus that went straight from the airport over there. They give you like a wristband, which controls your locker. It was pretty slick. They had everything set up. My biggest regret is that I had seen online that you could book these massages that they did in the water, like a floating massage. And I'm like, that's so cool. But I couldn't stomach the price, quite frankly. So I said, well, I'll think about it and I'll decide. And so I was in my hotel room in Paris on like Friday night at midnight, and there were still slots available. And by the time I got there the next day at like 3 p.m. local time, all of those slots had disappeared. So you're not joking when you say reserve ahead, but that's my one regret. I don't know if I'd ever go back. If I did go back, I would definitely get the massage. But I would also say it's definitely something that it's more fun to do with somebody else, like a family or, you know, a travel partner. Being by yourself was kind of like after about 30 minutes, I was like, okay. And then I went and had some overpriced sushi in the cafe and back to the airport.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a good assessment. It is a lot. It's a big price to stomach, but once you're there, it's unique. And, you know, I think it probably, if you're listening to this by now, you figured out whether it's for you or not. So we're not trying to talk you into it, but yeah, it's unique. I agree. It's also more fun with other people. So yeah, good assessment. Cool. Well, we're going to move on. So that was the Blue Lagoon. Oh, and by the way, what Lisa was saying, that's a good thing to keep in mind. If you have a layover in Reykjavik, that's not 1 hour, but it's not like a day. If you've got 5 or 6 hours, this is a really popular opportunity because it's so close to the airport. There's companies they'll sell you a transfer and entrance to the Blue Lagoon, so you can do it all in one go. My wife has basically put me on notice that anytime she goes to Europe, the first thing we'll do is check the Iceland air connections to see if we can do the Blue Lagoon on the way over or back. And only once we've ruled that out will we look at other airlines, because it is a really fun experience, and very relaxing midway through a transatlantic flight. So I did it once on my way to the airport, and it was the most relaxed flight to Seattle I've ever had coming from Europe. So
genius.
So great. Moving on to the next day trip, the Golden Circle. This is this driving tour that goes inland. You know, all of these trips, by the way, take, you know, the better part of the day. So this ends up being, I don't know, 6 hours of driving, something like this. The reason you do the Golden Circle is to get a little bit more into Icelandic nature. So along the way, you get to see a variety of beautiful landscapes. And there are 3 main stops on the Golden Circle. The first main stop is a place called Þingvellir. There's a couple of reasons why people go here. The first reason is, I talked earlier about how this is the place where the tectonic plates are pulling apart, the North American and the Eurasian tectonic plates. That actually runs right through the middle of this area. And there's a chasm that you can walk through. And it really gives you that sense of kind of walking between continents. So, you know, in theory, one of these cliffs is North America, the other one is Europe. Geologists would say that's not exactly right. This isn't exactly where that happens, but it certainly gives you that impression, and you're not far from the truth. I mean, this is really right where these 2 continents come together. It's also very important historically for Icelanders, because you might remember I mentioned The early Icelandic settlers in the 800s and 900s and 1000s, they lived in isolated farms all over Iceland. Well, they did come together every 2 years. They would send the chieftain or a representative, and they would all meet in the fields near Thingvellir, and they would have a great gathering where they would discuss the events of the day and make decisions. So this started around the year 930. So Icelanders like to say this is they have the oldest continually operating parliament in the world. That's, again, one of those things that's a bit of a stretch, but it's true. This sense of Icelanders coming together to make important decisions goes all the way back to Thingvellir in the year 930. So for Icelanders, it's a very important place as well. From Thingvellir, from there you go on to Geysir, which is the name of this geothermal plain. It's one of these plains that has lots of pools that are bubbling and steaming. And there's one big geyser right in the middle of the complex that just shoots up about every 10 minutes. In fact, the English word geyser comes from this place in Iceland. The problem with this geyser is it doesn't go off exactly every 10 minutes. It kind of varies. So what you end up doing is standing around in a field watching other people all bundled up with their cameras, literally shivering for 10 minutes, waiting for the geyser to go off. And then invariably everyone's camera goes to sleep and they don't realize it. So the geyser goes off and it lasts for like 2 seconds. So you see everybody scrambling to turn their cameras back on again. And by the time they have them up, the geyser's over and then they have to wait another 10 minutes. So it's a little bit of a silly thing, but I will say if you catch it, it is a pretty spectacular sight to see this geyser shooting off. That's one of those things you do when you're in Iceland.
Cameron, those folks look like they're in an REI commercial. What month was this taken in, and is it that cold, and do you need to look that outdoorsy?
This one was in early October, but they would look exactly the same in July and August. Iceland can be very cold, even in the summertime. Iceland, if you're lucky, it'll crack 60. Ian Watson, who wrote our Iceland book, he told me once, Icelanders don't, when they think about good weather and bad weather, what they think about is wind and no wind. So it can look beautiful and sunny and clear outside, but there can be a really frigid howling wind. So basically you always want to be bundled up. I would say wear layers. If you're going to Iceland for like 2 days on your way over to Europe, I wouldn't pack a winter coat just for those 2 days. But what I would do is bring plenty of layers. And when you head out for the day, be wearing all of your layers. And then you can kind of peel them off if you get lucky and have good weather. But yeah, even in July and August, it can be quite cool. Yeah,
thanks.
Good question. Then the last of the 3 stops of the Golden Circle is this amazing waterfall. This is one of the most impressive waterfalls in Iceland, and that is really saying something. This is Gullfoss, which it basically means golden waterfall. And man, it's just, I kind of imagine the Grand Canyon if there were a giant waterfall that was plunging down into it. I mean, it's just breathtaking. And there's this plateau where you could just stand out and you feel the mist and you actually feel the vibration of the ground of the water tumbling down into this ravine. It's just a spectacular sight. So that completes the sort of Golden Circle. Those are the 3 main stops. A lot of people love the Golden Circle. It's a great option for somebody who just wants a quick one-day taste of Iceland. I would say the kind of the rival day trip, sort of neck and neck with the Golden Circle, is the South Coast. And if I were picking for me personally, I think I slightly prefer the South Coast, only because it has an even more impressive, it's a little less famous, but it's a little more impressive variety of landscapes. So for instance, this is all about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Reykjavík. First, you see this amazing waterfall. Again, these 2 waterfalls are 2 of my favorite in Iceland. The last one and this one is called Seljalandsfoss. Unlike Gullfoss, where you're looking down at the waterfall, in this case, you're looking up at the waterfall. It's coming down over the cliff towards you. So it's this sort of classic bridal veil waterfall. And there's actually a trail that goes around behind the waterfall. You got to wear a raincoat and waterproof shoes or you will regret it. But it's really worth it. I mean, talk about really feeling the power of the nature of these waterfalls. I mean, this is just a spectacular sight. Great experience. Just down the road, maybe 20 minutes, half hour from that waterfall, this is one of the glaciers in Iceland that's the easiest to reach from Reykjavík. It's called Stolheimajökull. And from the parking lot, you can walk about 15 or 20 minutes and pretty easily get to a point where you can almost, depending on conditions, you can actually touch the glacier or get really close to it. You can feel the ice cold from it. So it's a great kind of chance to get an easy glimpse at a glacier while you're in Iceland for a short stay. And then further down the road from that is a black sand beach called Reynisfjara, with beautiful sea stacks. And this is some of that basalt rock that I was talking about, this unique volcanic formation. If you remember when I was talking about Reykjavík's church, and it has that stair-step gable, well, this is what that is sort of trying to evoke. So you can really get a sense of how that kind of embraces the landscape, and really spectacular. Now, all of the stuff on the south coast is kind of in the shadow of a giant glacier-topped mountain that is called Eyjafjallajökull. I'm very proud of myself because it took me years to learn how to say that, Eyjafjallajökull.
I'm very impressed.
Thank you. Actually, Icelanders would probably give me about a C+. It's even with all of my practice, I'm barely getting it. But a lot of people just call it E15 because it's E followed by 15 letters. In any event, Eyjafjallajökull, if you've heard of it, it's because this was the volcano that erupted under that glacier in 2010. You might remember in 2010, there was a period where you literally couldn't fly in or out of Europe for a few days because this volcano threw all this ash high up into the atmosphere and it drifted over Europe. I think I remember Rick Steves got stuck in Venice for a couple of days, poor him, trying to come home. Lisa, did you get affected by that back then?
Oh my Lord. Oh my
What happened?
Lord. I worked in the tour department back then, and you can imagine how many tours we had going on at the same time. So all we did all day long was answer calls about people having to, join their tours late, worried about whether they were going to make it there at all. And we're just like, volcano.
It went on for like 4 or 5 days, didn't it? I mean, it was kind of weird. I can't remember before COVID. I can't remember another interruption of air travel like that in my history of travel. So yeah, so that was Iceland's legacy to the world, the South Coast's legacy to the world. Now, of course, it's dormant again now, and it's, you can see it's basically just a big snow-covered mountain over farms. But Icelanders are very aware, like the the volcano that I showed you earlier that just appeared this year, they're always aware that any of these volcanoes could become active again at any moment. There's another volcano, I think it's 50 or 100 miles down the road from here, that all the experts are saying, we're overdue. That one's going to blow at some point too. Now, usually they have advance notice. In this case, I don't think they anticipated the disruption to air travel. I don't think anyone was hurt by this particular volcano. They can see it coming far enough away that in the immediate area, they can get away. But, there's a place on the South Coast, again, not far from here, where the bridges across the rivers for the road are designed to be swept away by volcano eruptions and by avalanches caused by these kinds of things. I mean, that's the way the Icelanders live. They just know at any point their environment could decide to change drastically. So this is the last of our 4-day trips. And this is actually one of my favorites, partly because it's a little bit less known and it takes a little more effort to reach. So from the South Coast where we just were, it's a ferry trip, or you can actually fly to this area from Reykjavík. I did that and just did it for the day. It's a half hour there and you spend the day seeing the place and a half hour back. It's called the Westman Islands, and it's basically just a sort of remote fishing community on these islands that are just off island South Coast. But why most people go here is because of its volcanic history. And that is in 1973, one night in January, in the middle of the night, a volcano above town that everyone thought was dormant. This is one where they didn't have a lot of notice. It just suddenly erupted. It woke everybody up in the middle of the night. They were able to evacuate the town. Nobody was hurt or injured by this. But then for the next several months, they had to watch as the lava from this volcano slowly crept into the sea. This actually grew the size of the island significantly, measurably. And they were really worried that it was going to actually seal off the fishing port because this was a fishing community. And if you seal off the port, it would basically become a ghost town. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But what's really cool about the Westman Islands is you can still walk around and see houses that were trapped in that volcanic eruption in 1973. And they even built this really interesting, great state-of-the-art museum where you can watch clips of this and hear the testimonials from people who live there. And they've actually got a couple of houses that were affected by this volcanic eruption. So you can really see the way that people who lived here had their lives turned upside down just because of an eruption one night in the middle of the winter. The other reason people go to the Westman Islands is because it has a great puffin population. Now, puffins are migratory birds, so they're only in Iceland from about early June until late August. But when they're in Iceland, there are more puffins on the Westman Islands than anywhere else on the planet. So this is a great place if you're curious to see puffins up close. I had a great day out with a guide who took me out to see puffins in their natural habitat. And man, they're just so much fun to watch. Lisa, have you ever seen puffins in their natural habitat?
I have seen puffins once off the coast of Ireland, yes.
Aren't they just as adorable in real life, if not more so than in pictures?
I'm embarrassed to say that I actually teared up when I saw one. I didn't think it was going to be a big thing for me. I was there with family and some friends, and we saw it off the cliffs of Ireland. I was gobsmacked at how delightful it was. It was charming.
Yeah, it's just so much fun to see them in their natural habitat. Again, you have to see them in the summertime, but This is just one more. You can see them all over Iceland. There's different places, but this is the Westman Island is where you'll see the most of them. So great. I think we're ready for another Q&A break. Lisa, if you have any questions, and we're running a little bit long. So after this Q&A, I'm going to do a quick spin. We might go a little late tonight, but I'm going to do a quick spin around the ring road, and then we'll have a third Q&A break. But Lisa, do you want to toss me a few questions in the meantime?
Speaking of a quick spin, people are asking, is it difficult or easy to drive in Iceland? And what side of the road do they drive on?
Well, they drive like we do on the right, and it's really easy to drive in Iceland. It's actually a very delightful place to drive. They've got well-maintained roads. There's very light traffic. It can be a little hectic in the Reykjavík suburbs at rush hour, like it could be anywhere. But no, it's a great place to drive. And actually, I think it's a great way to go because a lot of people ask me, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but they ask, should I rent a car or should I take paid excursions to do these trips that I just talked about? So if you're in Iceland for 2 days, you might say, I'll take an excursion to the Golden Circle and then an excursion to the South Coast. Especially for 2 people or more, if you actually price out the cost of those excursions, it's probably cheaper, even with the high cost of gas and so forth. It's probably cheaper to do it on your own with the car. And by the way, in our guidebook, we've written self-guided driving tours for all of these. So you should be able to see most of what you would see or all of what you would see at your own pace as you went on a tour. I'm not saying the excursions are a bad thing, but they can be pretty expensive and it's pretty inflexible. They tell you be here at this time and this is what we're going to see, and you can't kind of pick and choose. Whereas if you have your own car, you can make your own itinerary, you can focus on the things that interest you. And again, the price is pretty reasonable. And again, it's a very easy place to drive, I think, for the most part.
Are the road signs in English or Icelandic?
Oh, you know, they're international or in English. It's in general, English is very widely spoken throughout Iceland, so everything is very English friendly. I've never run into a language barrier personally traveling in Iceland.
Okay. And this is something a lot of people are asking, so this will be my last question for this break. But people really want to know what is the best time to visit Iceland? You mentioned the puffins were in the summer, so what other things should we be on the lookout for?
That's a great question. Actually, I had a feeling I would get this question, so I prepared a couple of slides to answer it because I knew this would be a hot topic, and it's a really good question, and it's an important question. So I think your basic choices are summer or winter. So the main peak summer season is July and August. Anything outside of that is either shoulder season or off season. I love to go in the summertime, whether July or August or late June, early September. If you go much beyond that, some things start to close down. The reason I like to go in the summer is this is a picture I took in, I think, early June, and I took this picture at about 11:30 at night. So remember, Iceland is the land of the midnight sun. And so during the summertime, I was there. The first time I was in Iceland, I was there for about 3 weeks, and I never saw it actually dark outside. The sun sets, but it just kind of traces the horizon, and then it pops out again. So you basically have some light in the sky 24/7. Now, this is great for someone like me who likes to pack a lot in because you can see a lot and be out sightseeing at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and it'll feel like it's daytime. I've even heard of people who go to Iceland for a very short time and they spend the day sightseeing in Reykjavík, and then at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, they get in the car and then they go and do the Golden Circle or the South Coast, get back at midnight or something. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but if you have a lot of energy and not a lot of time, it's actually doable because it's light out so much. So I love going in the summer. Like I said, you can't expect warm temperatures, but you have a better chance of good temperatures, of a little bit less cold, less cloud, less wind. You'll still need to bundle up in the summertime. But the further you get off season, the more you're going to run into the possibility of inclement weather. The opposite option is going in the winter time. And a lot of people like to go in the winter intentionally because they want to see the northern lights. And I totally understand that. The northern lights, if you see them, are really spectacular. I have a little bit of suspicion about planning a trip in the winter just to see the northern lights for a couple of reasons. One reason is you can't be guaranteed of seeing the northern lights. There's no time of year where you'll definitely see them. If it's cloudy, if the conditions aren't right, you could be in Iceland for a week in October, November, December, January, and never see the northern lights. So it's a little bit risky in that regard. The other thing is, when you do see them, they're not quite always as spectacular as you think they're going to be. So this is a picture I grabbed off the internet. And when you see pictures of the northern lights, this is what you imagine, with these huge swirling patterns. But of course, this was taken with a special camera, long exposure. It was doctored up quite a bit later. if you do see the northern lights, it's more likely to look something like this. So this was a time I was in Iceland in October. I was already in bed. It was 11:30, and I peeked out the window and saw these shimmering green lights in the sky. So I jumped out of bed and grabbed my camera, and this was about as good as I could do. Now, I was in Reykjavík. If I was out in the countryside away from lights, it would have been a little bit better. But even when you see the northern lights, unless you're really lucky, it's going to be sort of a faint tinge of green as opposed to something that's quite this spectacular. So I'm not saying don't go in the winter for the northern lights, but just be realistic about what you're actually going to see. The other reason I'm a little cautious about going in the winter time is, of course, this is Iceland. They get a lot of snow in the winter. A lot of the roads closed. I'm about to talk about the ring road, which goes all the way around Iceland. You cannot drive the ring road in the winter because several sections of that road, at least you can't drive all the way around. Several sections of the road are closed. This picture I actually took in early October. I was with my parents. We were coming home from Europe from separate trips, and we met up in Iceland for a 72-hour layover, and I took them to all my favorite places. And here I thought we were taking a shortcut to get to the Golden Circle, but we got halfway up this mountain pass in October, and it was so snow covered that eventually we had to turn around and go back and go all the way around to the Golden Circle, which added an hour and a half, 2 hours to the day. And that's October. So there is risk with going off season. If you're going to be going off season, don't expect to get too far outside of Reykjavik. You're probably going to be limited to well-cleared roads that are close to the capital. That said, it can be a good time to go. I'm going to just carry right along on with the last part of the talk. And like I said, we're going a little bit over, but hopefully you'll join me for the rest of this trip around the ring road. And so far, I've talked about things that you would see in Iceland if you're in the country for a few days, Reykjavik and day trips. If you have been to Iceland for a few days and want to see more, or if you just want to dive in the first time and really do it right, I highly recommend the ring road. I mean, this is like the world's ultimate road trip. So the ring road is Highway 1 that runs entirely around the perimeter of Iceland. It's about 800 miles of driving. And to really do it justice and slow down and enjoy yourself, it takes about a week. So figure you can squeeze it in a few days shorter if you drive nonstop, but a week lets you do it at kind of a reasonable pace and maybe even spend 2 nights here and there as opposed to just all 1-night stays. But it's totally worth it. I mean, this is just a spectacular way to get out and really see Icelandic nature. Most of the population of Iceland is near the coastline. So by doing the ring road, you're going to basically go through almost every town or city of any major size in the entire country. And it really gets you out into some incredible scenery. Now, you're going to get great scenery close to Reykjavik, but the further you get out, you'll realize just how much variety of landscape there is in Iceland. I mean, this is kind of Iceland's big sky country, just breathtaking. And as you travel along, there's just everywhere you go, there's craters and there's glaciers and there's waterfalls, and it's just a wonderful trip. I'm going to sort of zip through, we talked earlier about clockwise versus counterclockwise. I'm going to quickly do a clockwise spin, although it's backwards for you, I guess, right? But I'll do a clockwise spin through the ring road, and I'll kind of call out some highlights as I go. One thing I love about the ring road, once you get out of the capital of Reykjavik, here we're maybe 4 hours north of the capital. On our way up the ring road, you get to some really interesting little countryside museums. This is a place called Glaumbær, and this shows traditional, basically farm architecture of Iceland. When you see all these pictures of Iceland, you notice there's not a lot of trees. So they would often have a wood frame for a house, but then they would build the rest of the house with sod. So you have these kind of distinctive Icelandic sod houses. And this is a wonderful kind of an open air folk museum where you can go in and actually see the living quarters for the farmhands who would live at a place like this through the summertime so that they could work on the farms. Iceland does this kind of stuff really well. And you wouldn't think that once you get outside of the Reykjavik area, there'd be good museums, but there are just some wonderful, beautifully curated, kind of offbeat little museums in the middle of nowhere that are just fantastic. This is one of them. As we go north along the ring road, I have a lot of favorite towns in Iceland, and this is somewhere on the list. It's called Siglufjordur, and this is very common, by the way. A lot of Icelandic towns are named for the fjords they're on, or vice versa. And a lot of town and fjord names end with fjordur. So this is Siglufjordur. It's just a really charming town in a really spectacular setting. But one thing I love about this is it's got this great museum called the Herring Era Museum. Now, I go to tons of museums with my guidebook research work. I mean, there are days when I'm in Europe when I literally go to 10 or 12 museums in a single day. So I kind of get jaded on them. But what I really love is a museum that takes a topic that seems totally obscure and makes it absolutely fascinating. And so this herring era museum does a great job of that in Siglufjordur, and it just talks about the importance of herring fishing in Icelandic history. In the 19th century, herring was extremely valuable. People love the way it could be preserved and taken on long voyages. And so it really motored the entire Icelandic economy. There are people who say it was the herring industry that allowed Iceland to become financially independent, which actually allowed them then to become an independent country, a few decades later. So herring was very important in Iceland, and this was a town that had a huge herring industry. And now you can walk through this museum that tells you all about it. Again, I never thought I'd be fascinated by herring, but Iceland really specializes in just this kind of museum. They do it really well. And then up in the very north part of Iceland, in terms of the geothermal landscapes and volcanic landscapes, I think this is one of the most impressive. It's a giant lake called Mývatn, and it doesn't look like much from this perspective. But the reason why this is interesting is if you remember this picture from where the two tectonic plates are pulling apart, and you've got that red and orange line, you'll notice in the northern part of Iceland, this goes right through this area called Mývatn, through the middle of this lake. So this was a very active, volcanically active region going back a long time ago. And so you still see aspects of the landscape from that period. So this is a place called Skútustaðir, where they have what they call pseudo craters. So these aren't craters like you think of a volcano where the eruption came out of the volcano of the crater. These are pseudo craters because they're giant molten bubbles of rock that popped and sort of collapsed. So it's a very distinctive landscape that you get to see there. And then just literally like 5 or 10 minutes down the road, this is another completely different volcanic landscape in Dimmuborgir. And this is a case where this area was underwater. And so these kind of pinnacles and mountains that you see here, these were not formed over eons. They were formed over the course of hours because molten rock leaked up through the base of this, what this lake was. And then they solidified and turned into these mountains. And now you can kind of walk through these. This is just a breathtaking place for these kind of volcanic landscapes. I mentioned the Blue Lagoon earlier. There's a different version of this here in Mývatn called the Mývatn Nature Baths. I like this because it's kind of the poor man's Blue Lagoon. It's less expensive, it's less touristy, but it's sort of the same idea. It's sort of naturally heated thermal water in a lava rock landscape, a little less pretentious, a little less spa-like. This is one of my favorite thermal bathing opportunities in Iceland. Just a great place to unwind at the end of a long day of driving. And then also nearby is this geothermal field called Námafjall. And first of all, this looks like you're on the surface of Mars. It's just amazing to walk through this area. And they have these things called fumaroles, which are basically look like piles of rocks, and they're just hissing with steam 24/7. There's no geysers like you see on the Golden Circle, but in some ways this is more impressive because it's just constant. And it's just a really dramatic example of Iceland's geothermal landscapes. And then a little detour from the ring road. I really love this town just near that Lake Mývatn I just showed you. It's a place called Húsavík, which is mainly known for its whale watching cruises. It's a really popular place to go out and try to see whales in Iceland. It's even got a great museum where they've actually got skeletons from whales that have washed up on beaches, beach whales that have washed up on beaches all around Iceland. So you can actually see complete skeletons of giant whales right here in this town that's famous for its whale watching.
Is Húsavík famous for anything else? Because I think I recognize that name.
I think you're thinking of the Netflix movie, the Eurovision Song Contest. With Will Ferrell. Yeah, that's a great movie that came out last year. And Will Ferrell and Rachel McAdams in that movie came from this town of Húsavík, and they wrote a song about it for the Eurovision Song Contest. It's performed as sort of the grand finale of the competition, and it's about Húsavík. The name of the song is Húsavík. It actually was nominated for an Oscar for Best Original Song, and there was this kind of grassroots movement of people who were just dying for this little Icelandic town to win the Oscar in a roundabout way. And unfortunately, they didn't win, but yeah, that's probably what you're thinking of.
I love the Eurovision Song Contest, so I thought that was a great movie.
Yeah, well, you can see it for yourself if you do the ring road. Okay, so continuing on around the ring road, I keep talking about the great waterfalls of Iceland. This is another spectacular one called Dettifoss. Kind of reminds me of that Gullfoss that we saw in the Golden Circle, but an even more dramatic landscape. And this is another place where you can see that distinctive volcanic basalt formations in the canyon that's leading up to the waterfall. Now from here, you kind of hook around the east coast of Iceland along the east fjords, and sort of from a road trip perspective, this gets a little boring because you're just going in and out of fjords all day long, forever. I mean, it literally takes hours to go through all these fjords. But even here, I mean, this is as far as you can get in Iceland from Reykjavík and still be in Iceland. There's these wonderful little towns. This is another one of my favorite Icelandic towns, Seyðisfjörður. And this, weirdly, for being so far from Reykjavík, I mean, this would be like a 10 or 12 hour drive from Reykjavík. It's got this wonderful little kind of cosmopolitan feel to it. There's actually an art academy in this town. So people come from all over Iceland and abroad to study here. And it just has kind of a funky, trendy, artsy feel. This is a microbrew pub, and my wife and I went to an amazing sushi restaurant just up the street. So this just, to me, exemplifies how Iceland, even when you're in the middle of nowhere, you come across a little town that's just amazing. That just feels like you could be in a neighborhood of a big city. The Icelanders just have that wonderful spirit about it. And then I'd say the last big stop before we head back on the ring road, as you kind of loop around and you're heading kind of in southeast Iceland, is glacier country, and specifically Vatnajökull, which is the biggest of Iceland's many glaciers. This is a gigantic glacier by area. It's the size of the state of Delaware. And there's several places where the glacier comes down in tongues. And in a couple of those, it forms these beautiful, dreamy glacier lagoons. And this is just an incredible place. There's two of them, and you can just walk around on the shore and look out and actually see icebergs that have come off of the glaciers floating by. I actually went on a boat trip. This is something that's worth booking ahead if you can. Went out on a boat trip into one of the glacier lagoons, and it's incredible. The captain takes you out, so you get really like you're completely surrounded by the majesty of Iceland, and you come up close to all of these icebergs. And then the captain says, "Well, be quiet," and you hear this kind of crack sound like a gunshot. And he says, "Well, that's where a new iceberg just calved off of the face of the glacier and landed in the water." It's just incredible. And then the captain leans over the boat and pulls up this chunk of ice. And he says, "This is 500-year-old ice." And he passes it around the boat, and everyone touches the ice. And you just really feel the majesty of Icelandic nature here. It's wonderful. And then my favorite side attraction here, which might even be better than the glacier lagoons, is if you follow the river that leads out of one of the glacier lagoons, it goes past a black sand beach. And all of the little glaciers, the icebergs, as the icebergs shrink, they head out to the Atlantic. And just before they go out to the ocean, some of them wash up on this beach, and it's nicknamed Diamond Beach because it looks like a bunch of diamonds, giant diamonds scattered over black velvet. And man, this is just one of those places that's absolutely intoxicating. You walk through here, you feel like you can't imagine that you're actually in a place that's this beautiful. And this is another picture I took around 11:30 at night. My wife and I had a really long day of driving and checked into our hotel about 10. And I said, "You know what? It's still light out. I'm gonna zip over to those glacier lagoons." And here I was on this beach with a few other hardy travelers, ogling these icebergs that had washed up on the beach. Now from here, you kind of turn the corner, so it's about 4.5, 5 hours back to Reykjavík, and you're going past the south coast at this point, where you get to see some of these great sites we saw earlier, and you end up right back where you started on the main square here in Reykjavík. Great. Well, that's basically a quick trip around the ring road and other parts of Iceland. And I hope we have time for a couple more questions. Thanks for sticking with me as we went a little bit long, but I'm going to hand things back to Lisa to wrap things up and to field the last few questions.
You know, Cameron, I've only spent 5 or 6 hours in Iceland, and I didn't have a strong desire to go back, but you have convinced me completely. I'm going to go. I'm going to see the Black Diamond Beach. I'm going to eat the candy. I'm just going to enjoy it. I think that's wonderful. You really worked some strong magic with me tonight.
Excellent. Well, me too. I can't wait to go back now too.
So a couple of questions. I know we're running a little bit late, but someone was asking about the tipping culture in Iceland.
Yeah. So Icelanders don't tip, and there are very few places I've been to where that's the case. So Icelanders just simply don't tip for anything. I've recently been hearing from people in the tourist trade in Iceland, because I've been telling people this: you don't have to tip at restaurants, you don't have to tip in any situation. A few people are now reaching out to me and saying, well, actually, because we have all this tourism now, servers in restaurants in Reykjavík are used to Americans leaving a tip, so that we've kind of taught them how to expect tips. So I don't quite know how to answer that question. I will say, when I've been to Iceland, the last time was maybe 3 years ago, I didn't tip at all. I might think twice if I have a really great meal of tipping a little bit. It's one of those weird questions: where do you want to follow the local customs, or do you want to follow the new tourist. You're kind of contributing to a new thing that tourists have introduced. But traditionally, Icelanders don't tip.
Okay, thank you. And Craig was wondering, is there wildlife on the ring road? Are there any dangers to hiking besides the steaming geyser things?
There's no dangerous wildlife. The most dangerous wildlife in Iceland are the sheep, because they'll run across the road at a moment's notice. And Ian gave me a great tip. If you see a baby sheep on one side of the road and the parents on the other side, and it's coming up on the road, hit the brakes, because one or the other is about to run across the road in front of you. So I'd say the biggest danger is drivers running into sheep and occasionally other livestock. There's no day, I can't think of a single, it's kind of like New Zealand. I can't think of a single animal in Iceland that could kill you. I can think of a lot of nature that could kill you. You have to be extremely careful at these geothermal sites, because some of those bubbling pools that you see can be very hot. If you're walking on a beach in Iceland, you have to be extremely careful, because we're not used to, even if you walk on the beach here in the US, because it's in the middle of the North Atlantic, they have very strong tides and sneaker waves that'll come out of nowhere. And this happens all the time. Tourists think that they're well enough back from the water, and they're not looking at the water, they're looking inland, and a sneaker wave comes up and pulls them out. This happens all the time. I mean, those are the dangers in Iceland, not from animals though. Yeah.
Well, that's good advice. Okay, so you've whet my appetite. I've told you I want to also compliment you on your wonderful pronunciation, but I don't want to forget to talk about your favorite writing, or the writing that you do that I love the most, which is your blog. So,
thank you.
If you will allow me, I want to show people how to get to your blog on our website right here. And you can see, is that working? You're seeing the travel blog?
Yep.
Okay, so Rick Steves is at the top, as it should be. But then there you are, Cameron's Travels. You can follow this link and read everything, because you post, how often do you post?
Through COVID, I've been doing about once a month, but when I'm actually traveling, it's more like once a week, every couple of weeks.
So during COVID,
I did a blog series on Iceland, and we have a few of those links in our list of links. And if you go in the search bar and you just type Iceland, you can find all of the blog posts that I've ever done on Iceland, including a lot of practical tips. I have an article about the top 10 budget tips in Iceland. If you go on the filter by type and click on Cameron's blog, that'll take you right to all of my Iceland blog posts. I have a post about my favorite day trips from Iceland. I have top 10 Icelandic experiences. I have tips for driving the ring road, that sort of thing.
Terrific. So I got a puppy and learned how to bake focaccia, but you did something even better.
I did, yeah. When we were all grounded and unable to travel for 2 years, I took a few months off last winter, and I took some of my posts from my blog, and I did a lot of new writing as well. And I wrote a book. It's a book about basically kind of a memoir of my 20+ years working with Rick. It's my favorite travel stories, my favorite Europeans, the lessons I've learned from the people I've met there. It's also kind of an inside look if you're a Rick Steves fan. I've got a chapter about how to write a guidebook. I've got a chapter about filming TV shows, writing and filming TV shows with Rick. I've got a chapter about how to be a tour guide, what it's like to actually guide a tour around Europe. And so, yeah, it's coming out in February. Officially, it's coming out in February, published by Traveler's Tales. But we are going to do a special, I think, advance exclusive pre-sale on ricksteves.com starting in December. The title of the book is The Temporary European, because it's all about my life spending 100 days a year in Europe and how I've kind of learned to be as much a European as you can be without actually living there. So yeah, look for that on ricksteves.com in December, or Amazon and any bookstore coming up in February.
Okay, that's perfect. So I can put it on my Christmas list.
Yes, yeah, perfect stocking stuffer. For the Rick Steves fan in your life who wants some inside scoop and some travel tales, that's the thing.
So before we say goodnight, I would like to remind everyone about our upcoming shows. Next week, we have Stefan in Bulgaria. The week after that, Cameron will return with us. As Gabe, Julianne, Ben, Cameron, and I talk about our favorite activities and stories and sites in Europe in a roundtable discussion. And then on November 15th, we have the pandemic post-COVID travel show with Cameron and Rick. And I want to thank you, Cameron. You know, I said at the beginning, we've been friends for 20+ years. I've always respected you as a colleague, as a friend, but just the way you communicate travel is so effective. And I just really appreciate you being here with us tonight.
Well, that means a lot. Thank you so much. And, I think all of us at Rick Steves Europe, I hope it comes through from any of us. We just love what we do. We love to travel. We are teachers at heart. And, you just try to shut me up about a place that I love like Iceland. So thank you all for humoring me and for humoring all of us in pursuing our passions. I mean, we just want all of you to travel as well as you possibly can.
Thank you very much. I'm going to throw up the last slide.
Cool.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, everybody.